Hello, everybody, and welcome to Is This the Norm? Your hosts today are me, Laura.
Rebecca.
Hey, and I'm Heather, and today I'm going to talk about contraception throughout history. So there's a variety of methods, of course, that started very, very long time ago. So disclaimer, do not try any of these historic methods. They are dangerous, a lot of them, and it's just more about medical history and not advice. So first, we'll start back in time in Mesopotamia period and Egypt. So most methods involved something called a pessary. And what a pessary is a donut shaped, it pretty much looks like a donut. And it's a very puffed up donut with a hole in it. And so these pessaries, what they would do with them is they'd insert them into the vagina. And it's actually much like modern pessaries. They don't really look much different, just a different material. Obviously, they didn't have rubber or non-latex types of rubbers to do the pessaries. And it's usually was a small round stone that they used as a pessary. And then in Egypt from 1850 BC and 1500 BC, they have documentations of using these pessaries. And what they would put on them is like a mixture of honey, acacia, I think I'm saying that correctly, leaves that were fermented, and then lint. And this actually did serve as an effective spermicide. I'm not sure if the honey did anything or the fermented leaves, but I'm wondering if the lint soaked up some of the sperm, which kind of prevented the pregnancy. I'm not really sure. But another combo of use was honey, sodium carbonate, and crocodile dung. Right? That's the worst one. But that was actually considered ineffective. And of course, as we see here today, Rebecca, your face.
That's not something that I want to put in my vagina. All of this sounds very wrong. And
Right.
the lint,
Lint.
I mean, even at lint, I'm like, I don't want that. That's messy and gross.
Yeah, what we
Heather.
would do to prevent pregnancy. So,
I mean, yeah, I guess you got to do what you got to do.
And
right.
clearly
this is
was
BC.
before infection was correlated to dung and whatnot. But real quick to Heather, in my mind, when you describe this, to me, it sounds like a diaphragm. Is that the right vision in your head to have, or is it very different?
No, it's like a donut. Picture a donut, like a smaller donut.
Okay.
Literally, that's what it looks like.
So it's like a rock that's shaped like a ring, and then inside the middle of the open ring is where they put this stuff? Or
I'd imagine.
Oh, okay. Am I thinking too much into it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I probably didn't get into it. For me, pessaries, even in the medical field, the only time I remember using a pessary or helping an individual female with a pessary was for bladder purposes, to keep the bladder from falling out.
Yeah, I never heard of that before.
Not to prevent pregnancy.
Okay.
Right. So
yeah, because you're kind of talking about a pessary, and I would imagine, like me and most of our audience probably has never seen or heard of. Your nurse background, it probably is common knowledge to you.
Yeah, if you Google it, you can Google it. It'll
that's a good
come
idea
up right away. So, because I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Pessaries are not just something that only obviously happened in Mesopotamia and Egypt. But yeah, I guess I didn't really look into that. But I'd imagine you kind of put it all over it. And maybe I would imagine you put the lint in the hole. I don't know.
That's what I was envisioning, is the lint going in the hole.
But then again, I'm not sure why there's a hole. Maybe it's so you can pull it in and out.
I have so many questions too.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm just really got stuck on the crocodile dung, and I was like,
For sure.
That was kind of what threw me. But okay.
As soon as I saw that, I would have wanted to move on to Heather.
It was just kind of like,
Yeah, that's
anyways,
fair.
My thoughts were like, this is, 1850 BC to 1550 BC. And the Egyptians were doing this. I probably have told you guys, I just feel like Egyptians were so much more progressive. Once it came AD, the Dark Ages, I think, Rebecca, you said this, we just kind of went down in our progressiveness as far as humans. But anyhow, so in ancient Greece, they had this specific plant. It's a giant fennel, and it's called silphium. and it was used as a seasoning, an aphrodisiac, perfume, and as an oral contraceptive. And it was widely considered extinct and disappeared around 1 AD. It only grew on the coast of Cyrene, which is now Libya, and all attempts to cultivate it elsewhere has failed. It failed then, and they haven't been able to, of course, bring it back. It was worth its weight in silver at the time. So there was just this one distinct area it grew. There's drawings of it. I'm not sure if the drawings are based on drawings in other places or it's just a guess. So, anyways, it no longer exists, and they have no way to know whether it was effective or not, this fennel for oral contraception. In ancient Greece, other botanicals that were used either orally or through pessaries included, oh, these are hard words and people can correct me, fetida, or otherwise known as hing or devil's dung, also derived from fennel. So again, it's not, it says devil's dung, but this is actually a plant again. So it's another derivative fennel plant. So Queen Anne's lace, willow, date palm, pomegranate, pennyroyal, artemisia, myrrh, and rue have been confirmed by modern research to have an anti-fertility properties in all of these that I listed. Most of them are some kind of herb or plant. Of course, date palm is, from, I think it's from a palm tree is from what I know. And I don't really know what pennyroyal is, but I think it's just, these are all just plants. When I saw them, there was just pictures of them. Queen's Anne lace is still used for birth control in India. Most of the herbs mentioned, including Queen Anne's lace, is highly toxic. So women had to be really careful on what dosage they used to avoid injury and even death. What those injuries were, I really don't know. I'm assuming it probably has some kind of effect on your organs if, it poisons you and you die. And then kind of some mentions of contraception in the Bible is the term coitus interruptus, aka the withdrawal method or the pull and pray method, which makes sense. In the book of Genesis, the story of Onan, where he practiced coitus interruptus to prevent fathering a child with his deceased brother's widow, it talks about him spilling his seed on the ground. So that's where the mention of coitus interruptus is mentioned. And then Greeks, a little bit further on, they would use lemon or half a lemon as birth control. The acidity offered some spermicidal properties, but as one would imagine, not very comfortable. Again, for the woman. Maybe for the man too. I mean, acidity on any sensitive parts, I would imagine, doesn't feel so great. And then the Greeks also used bronze pessaries, were popular amongst the upper class Romans, and had some, Greeks and Romans had some effectiveness as a barrier method. The most popular and effective method in the ancient times was the coitus interruptus, the pull and pray method. And so also during that time, Aristotle recommended applying cedar oil before intercourse. This may have assisted in prevention, but was far from reliable. What I could pretty much find is that, if anything, the oil might have prevented the sperm from getting to where they need to, more of the oil, other than the cedar itself. And then Hippocrates, known as the father of medicine, well, I don't want to talk about that, but I think that he probably had good intentions, recommended that women who did not desire to conceive to drink copper salt dissolved in water, claim this would prevent pregnancy for a year. That's not true. Another person, ancient medical writer Cyranus, I think is how you say it, Ephus, later found that copper salt was not only ineffective, but also incredibly toxic and dangerous. So, boo on Hippocrates.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking in my head of chemotherapy and cancer. That's the equation you're talking about, is to prevent pregnancy, I'm going to poison myself.
Right.
And I could kind of understand that. I mean, it's all on the women to take care of. You don't know if that guy's going to stick around, especially BC. You just don't know if they're going to stick around. And so you'd already have 5 kids and I can't have any more kids.
Right.
So
right.
I don't think it's,
right.
I could see actually being one of those women that would, I can't have another kid.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean, I totally get it. And then the other thing is, where Egypt was more progressive than the Romans, is that In Roman times, the women were just expected to that's all they didn't have, like, a high standing, they just took care of kids and took care of their husband. Where in Egypt, you had pharaohs that were women, so they didn't have that mindset necessarily, they were more progressive in that nature, but in Rome, women were yeah, that's what they did, they took care of the kids and made sure their husband was happy and, maybe a lot of times they're off. Romans were always at war, so I'm sure that a lot of times, like you said, the husband might have died, the woman was left alone all the time, but then again, that might be helpful, not getting pregnant.
But I would
So
also
anyway, so
say,
yeah,
like,
go ahead.
I mean, I've heard stories of in the United States when we were first developing as a country, women getting pregnant and, being on her own and she's trying to work. And so they would sell their babies to somebody
Mhm.
to take care of them. They were trapped either way they went. But also back to you talking about cancer and chemotherapy, how it hurts you as it also helps you. And I feel like we listen to these contraceptives you're talking about right now and how they're so damaging and bad for the woman. I mean, today's birth controls are the same, in my opinion, unhealthy. Like the hormones. I'm sure you're going to get into it about male birth control that won't be
Yeah,
on the
that's
market
still
because it's
developing.
unhealthy, but yet the female birth control they put on the market,
Oh, yeah,
we always
that
get
will
the
be
short
the
end of the
theme with
stick.
this birth control. It's
Very
all on the
true, Laura.
woman.
Very true. Yeah,
Yeah.
today's birth control could be just as bad, honestly, maybe worse in some ways.
Yeah.
Right, right. Just because it's FDA approved doesn't mean it's healthy. It just means, yeah, your chances of getting through this are pretty good.
I think it was all timing as to why hormonal birth control was put out on the shelves, because this day and age, I don't think it would be.
Yeah, there's a lot of conflict with that too, but okay. And then so Cyrano's Ephesus, that which, like I said, he found that was toxic, what Hippocrates was recommending. And he recommended common sense mechanical methods versus tinctures and mixtures, which, the pull and pray. He also recommended wools covered in oils or other gummy substances, which again, I think those substances are preventing the sperm from impregnating the woman. But however, most of his recommendations were also not effective. One recommendation was for women to hold their breath during sex and sneeze afterwards.
That's hilarious.
That's
Yeah,
grasping for
that would make it
straws.
enjoyable. Then again, if depends on the man, holding your breath for that long, probably not a big deal.
It's not that long. It'll all be over
I'm joking.
soon.
Oh, like what? I'm glad that our pleasure was considered in that one. How can you make yourself sneeze? Okay. All right. So then moving on to like Japanese and Chinese history. In 7th century BC, physician Tong Suan documented coitus reservist, which is AKA sex without ejaculation, and then coitus obstructus, or preventing the release of semen during intercourse. And then the main purpose was to preserve the man's yang, or masculine energy. It was thought that the man's yang was reduced with the female yin via intercourse, but the added potential benefit was preventing pregnancy. So yeah, again, it's our fault. We're always stealing from men, stealing their yang. So Chinese concubines would drink a mixture of lead and mercury to prevent pregnancy. And of course, there were severe side effects of toxic substances, of these substances that they were taking in, which included sterility, brain damage, kidney failure, and death. Likely what was happening, when I was talking about earlier about the ingestion of certain things were, cause your organs to fail. Another thing that they had, which I thought was pretty progressive in, the 7th century BC, glands condoms, or condoms that only covered the head of the penis, were used by the wealthy in China. It was made of oiled silk paper or lamb intestine. The Japanese made condoms from tortoise shells or animal horn. How they did that, I don't know. I didn't really look that up. I don't know if it was like a hard condom. I really don't know. I didn't get into that. I was kind of like, meh, all right, well, I'm going to move on from that. And then in India, Vatsayana, who wrote the well-known Kama Sutra, presented birth control methods like coitus obstructus. Also in India, other popular agents in ancient India included a potion made of powdered palm leaf and red chalk, as well as pessaries made of honey, rock salt, ghee, which is like that butter, that filtered butter, or seeds of palasa tree. I don't know how effective it is. It sounds like it wasn't really effective. I think it's more the pessary just preventing something from getting through. The Prophet Muhammad did not approve of contraceptive methods. However, 9th and 10th century physicians in India documented a few ways in which women could avoid getting pregnant if it might be dangerous for their health. This included coitus interruptus, as well as several pessaries using elephant dung, here's the dung again, cabbage, pitch, and rock salt. I'm not sure why. I couldn't really find why dung was such a great method, they thought. I don't know. I'm sure it prevented something because, again, if you put anything in there that prevents sperm, but I don't know.
I'm thinking it would prevent people from even wanting to have sex with you.
The smell itself. Oh, never mind.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if it smelled or if they cleaned it or how they got rid of the smell of dung. I mean, maybe the honey. Well, I mean, if you're using honey with the dung, I feel like because honey is naturally antiseptic. So maybe, I don't know.
You're still gonna smell bad. There's no way around it. I mean,
Yeah,
come on.
it's an interesting. All right. And then in Morocco, this was one of the things that I found that to prevent pregnancy was you would step over a grave of a recently dead corpse 3 times, or drinking water used to wash a corpse to prevent pregnancy. Yeah.
No.
I don't know what's worse.
No.
I don't know what's worse at this
I
point.
think a lot of this stuff they thought was working because, like, the woman just wasn't ovulating. Like, I don't know, like stepping over a grave 3 times, like, "Oh, it worked." No, she just wasn't ovulating.
No,
Maybe.
not a grave. A recently
Or dead body.
over a grave of a recently dead corpse. So
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah.
Like,
So
this,
I was
the probability was probably just she wasn't ovulating. And they're like, "Oh, that worked. Let's do it." Oh man, don't be drinking water from dead bodies. Yuck.
Yeah, so that
So
was the
sad.
one-off that I found in Morocco. Of course, not a lot of statistics on how well that worked. Okay, and then medieval times, because we were just progressive then, or the Middle Ages, which lasted over 1,000 years. So this was from 500 to 1500 AD. 1 in 3 women died during their childbearing years, and 1 in 4 children did not live to see their first birthday. So often they could not provide for the child after birth, so likely not enough food for the other children and then for yourself to produce milk. So that was the other problem. So a woman that would have a child out of wedlock was shunned, while the man had zero repercussions. Surprise, surprise. And then all methods of contraception or avoiding pregnancy were deemed sinful and immoral by the Catholic Church, but this did not prevent women in the Middle Ages from trying various methods of birth control. Since documentation was done by men of the church during the medieval times, the specifics of birth control during this time period were usually not recorded. But there is a few things that we did know because between, word of mouth and midwives, things were passed around to prevent pregnancy. What we know is that herbal potions were passed between these midwives and women by word of mouth. Various recipes either encouraged or prevented pregnancy. Of course, the popular method was coitus interruptus, and that was recommended in addition to various potions or mixtures. And then in 1484, Pope Innocent VIII issued a papal bull. Am I saying that right, Laura? Which is an official document from a pope.
Papal,
It's
I think.
papal bull, right? And then speculating a vast network of witches through Europe. This document accused this so-called witch network of having slain infants in the mother's womb and preventing or hindering men from performing the sexual act and thus preventing women from conceiving. And this kind of led also to the book, the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of the Witches, came out in the 15th century, and it's a treatise on witchcraft, and I'm sure in the next episode we'll get into that. but this was just to help find witches and persecute them. And it was first published in Germany and was written by Heinrich Kramer. And I thought he was German, but he actually, somewhere I read or watched that he was actually from the Dominican Republic. So I'm not sure, because it sounds like a German name too, but apparently he was from the Dominican Republic. I could have that wrong, but that's I read that somewhere. The accusations were witches were stealing men's penises and using forbidden knowledge granted to them by the devil. But how would you prove that they're stealing their penis? I'm not sure.
They didn't have to prove it back then. They just
I
said.
guess so. I mean, did you have proof that they have like penises in their pocket? I mean, come on. I just thought that was really interesting.
Not useful for us at all.
No. So, of course, this resulted in midwives and healing women being accused of witchcraft. And then, of course, we'll probably talk about this, but in the 16th and 17th century, over 60,000 suspected witches in Europe were put to death, and their knowledge was lost with them regarding birth control methods and other medicinal remedies, unfortunately. Another thing that, during this 1,000-year period, and it's still true today from what I know, not like 100%, but they said that breastfeeding is 98% effective in preventing ovulation for the first 6 months after birth if you breastfeed. Of course, women with children very close in age will warn you, against relying on this method. So I have a friend that I remember that she was breastfeeding and also on birth control that was acceptable during breastfeeding and still got pregnant.
Yeah, I very much would be that person that would get pregnant when my baby was just born. Not at all.
Again, this is just medical history, not advice.
Yeah, do not do that.
Okay, so, and however, in medieval Europe, breastfeeding among the wealthy was seen as something beneath them, and outsourced breastfeeding went to wet nurses. This was done so that women could return to the marital bed and continue making children, especially if the firstborn was a girl. Lots of pressure on women of status to produce as many children as possible. And then 15th century, in 1490, the first outbreak of syphilis occurred, which of course results in painful and humiliating sores on the face and body and often death. If you look up some of the pictures of the sores on the face, it's pretty bad. And this resulted in men, especially those that frequented brothels, to use protection to take precautions. This protection was condoms made of linen or sheep intestine and soaked in chemical solutions, which was the popular type of method then. The earliest knowledge of the founder of a condom is an Italian physician, Gabriele Falloppio, aka Fallopius, whose name later served as the inspiration for the name fallopian tubes. Recommended in a book published in the 1570s that men wear linen condoms tied tight with a ribbon to prevent venereal disease, specifically syphilis, because that was the big problem then. It was a big problem for multiple centuries in Europe, especially. It was where it's mostly documented. And then in the 18th century, the English Birth Rate Commission blamed the downward trend in fertility, not famine or poverty or other issues, on the wide use of condoms. This coined term condom I didn't find a lot of history of really where the word came from, but there is one place that I found that it was an angelicization of guadagni, the Italian word for glove. So that's one of the suggestions of where the term condom came from, but I just feel like condom and guadagni is not even close, so I'm not sure how that happened. If you guys find something, Google and let me know, interrupt me. So the 18th century legendary Venetian lover, Giacomo, I think I'm saying his first name, I bet it's Giacomo Casanova, we all know about him, wrote about using and reusing an assurance cap, which he tied, which is kind of like a sleeve on the penis, which he tied with a blue satin ribbon. He would also test it for holes by inflating it like a balloon. He also was a fan of using lemon rinds as cervical caps. I remember we talked about that earlier. And the church condemned the use of condoms because they prevented pregnancy and led to greater promiscuity. So any kind of form of birth control then, of course, was condemned by the church. And in the 18th century, condoms became very popular and could be purchased in pubs, barbershops, through chemists, and theaters. throughout Europe and America. I'm not sure why theaters, but I guess if you go to opera, maybe it's an aphrodisiac. I don't know, but I thought that was interesting. Primarily used by middle and upper class, they were expensive. Also, they would be used many times over and with multiple partners. So again, only preventing syphilis to the man, probably, but not from the man to the woman. And then in 19th century, in 1839, Charles Goodyear, so we're kind of in the US now, and I'm going to skip around in different countries that there is some meshing, but a lot of it comes from US history. Charles Goodyear discovered the process of vulcanizing rubber to make it elastic. The first rubber condoms were manufactured in 1855. They had a seam and were as thick as bicycle inner tubes, and this is where the term rubbers came from. So they were pretty thick. They weren't like what we see now. You can kind of Google it and look at it. They're pretty robust. If you think of an inner tube in a bicycle, I mean, it's still pretty thin, the inner tube on a bicycle, but trying to put that on, I can only imagine. And then
that's not going to break either.
No, but getting it on and off, I'm sure, was a task in itself. And then in the 1860s, there was the American Civil War, so there were lots of men soldiers traveling and visiting prostitutes. Rates of STIs, or sexually transmitted infections, during this time skyrocketed. To counter this issue was with sex education, and introduced this into public schools for the first time. I didn't know it was that early. I thought that was interesting. And they taught that abstinence was the only way to prevent disease. I mean, true. I think that's a good way to put it. And in 1873, the Comstock laws came about, which this criminalized obscene and immoral materials and literature from being posted by U.S. mail. This severely limited the knowledge and availability of birth control methods. Some states passed even stricter laws than the federal version. Some of these laws stayed on the books until the 1960s and even 1970s. And I remember from school that there was a lot of laws during these 1900s. I can't remember if it was like 30s to 50s about people being charged with these, criminal charges based on these obscene and immoral materials. A lot of it was around like shops that had adult products in certain areas. And anyways, there's lots of law about that. And many other countries during this time also passed laws that impeded the manufacturing and promotion of contraceptives. They had kind of like this moral watchdog groups. And, as sexually transmitted diseases, they said that this was considered punishment for sexual misbehavior. And the stigma was so great, the hospitals often refused to treat people who had syphilis, which is super sad. However, this did not slow down the production of condoms that were booming in the 1880s and continued to grow in popularity despite these like moral watchdogs. One of the earliest condom factories was founded in 1883 by a German Jewish immigrant named Julia Schmid, which is a male, who put his experience as a sausage maker to use and made condoms, popularizing the use of animal intestines as condoms. He marketed the condoms as French goods and medicine to get around the Comstock laws. So pretty smart. And he'll come up again here later. And then kind of skipping over the centuries, but this is just to kind of give you a background of where I'm leading. But in 1798, Thomas Malthus wrote an essay on the principles of population, and that population expands until all resources are used up, and that only two measures keep the population growth in check, which is death rates due to disease, war and starvation, and preventative measures, including birth control and postponement of marriage and celibacy, will help, decrease the population overload. He stated that preventative measures ensures a high standard of living while also increasing economic stability. His ideas heavily influenced the women's feminist movement. So even though he wrote this back in 1798, that kind of what's influenced women's movement in the 19th and 20th century. So in 1830, Annie Besant and Charles Bradlaugh published a book in Britain called Fruits of Philosophy, or A Private Companion of Young Married People. And this was written actually by an American doctor, Charles Moulton. So Besant and Bradlaugh published this book in Britain. The book explained various methods of birth control. Bessett and Bradlaugh were persecuted by the British government for spreading contraception knowledge. This drew significant public interest, and the sale of the book skyrocketed. So even though they're persecuted, people were buying this book. I mean, that tells you everything right there, right? By the late Victorian era, women throughout the industrialized world possessed life-changing knowledge of birth control because of this book. With the mass migration of families during this time from farm life to the city, the need for large families or for farmland just wasn't needed anymore. Thus, women were deciding to marry later and have fewer children. The birth rate in the UK dropped 29% between 1860 and 1880. And then in 1886, the first commercially manufactured birth control suppository is produced in England by London chemist W.J. Rendell. And it was what it was made of is cacao and nut butter suppository, known as Rendell's, was somewhat effective and commonly used in England until World War II. So just like a suppository, again, just probably prevents the sperm from getting where it needs to go. In the 1870s, early feminists coined the term voluntary motherhood, and they promoted the establishment of public education about family planning and advocated for making contraception legal. And then the biggest use of contraceptions in the 19th century was vulcanized rubber condoms and diaphragms that were used. And so it's like the diaphragm. I know that you were kind of thinking, Laura, earlier, like a pessary is like a diaphragm. No, the diaphragm is what you're thinking, where it looks like a little cup. A lot of cups nowadays that we use for our menstrual cycle is looks much like a diaphragm. And then in the 20th century, in World War I, sexually transmitted diseases were again a serious issue. The German military had been using condoms for decades for their soldiers, but not Britain or the U.S. And Schmid, again, the sausage maker, amongst others, made a huge profit selling condoms to Allied soldiers, but not the U.S. So these other people were getting it, but not the U.S. soldiers. U.S. soldiers were told to practice moral prophylaxis, because that works. You can imagine how well that worked. And there was like these, I don't know if we call it propaganda, but little posters that they would pass around or give out to the soldiers that said things like, "Go back to them physically fit and morally clean." And it was a picture with a woman, a mom, I presume, with her children around her with this little saying on it.
I wonder how many diseases they brought back with them back to the United States because they weren't allowed to use condoms.
Yeah. The US and Britain were the only countries that did not provide condoms to its soldiers. So this kind of answers your question, Rebecca. 10% of American troops contracted venereal diseases. However, in order to win, the wars or help with winning the wars, US and Britain decided that they had to give their prudish practices up and give them condoms.
Duh.
Yeah, right. So towards the end of the war, the US and British soldiers were issued condoms. And then in 1918, so this is around, right after the World War I, the New York Court of Appeals said that condoms could be used because they had a legitimate medical purpose of disease prevention. This decision was strengthened in the Federal Appeals Court in the 30s, and doctors could legally prescribe condoms to their patients for the purpose of disease control. As a result, condoms were widely used during World War II by U.S. soldiers, and Schmid became the official condom supplier for the U.S. Army. So I'm sure he, made tons of money.
I wonder if there's any stats on after these men came back from the war and brought these diseases. Wouldn't that cause the birth rate to go down? For instance, syphilis. If a woman has syphilis, she can't have a baby, right? Like that's pretty serious, isn't it? Or am I wrong?
Depends on how progressed it is, I think. Syphilis is a slow progression. It's not quick.
Yeah, and did they have means to treat it?
There was, only from a show I watched, Victoria. It's about the Victorian era with Queen Victoria. They had this almost like a sauna with some kind of silver to help treat it. I don't think it cured it. It just probably lessened the symptoms. I didn't really look in the treatments for syphilis because I was more concentrated on contraception. So I'm sure there was some treatments, but they weren't really effective until they finally figured out how to get rid of it, in modern times. I just don't really follow syphilis. I mean, I know it has a comeback apparently because I've seen billboards for it, so it's not like it's eradicated. It's just less common and it's treatable. So I don't really know a lot about the treatment with syphilis because I didn't deal with it as a nurse. I mean, to be honest, that was not one that I would see commonly, but I knew that it was having a comeback. What that looks like, I don't really know. And then where was I at? Sorry about that. Oh, so they had these condoms that they gave out to everybody in World War II. And then, of course, they had more of those posters that they would put out there to get men to use condoms. And of course, who are they bad mouthing? Women. So some of the ones I saw was, she may be a bag of trouble, syphilis, gonorrhea, use your condom. It's all us. And then another one was promiscuous woman. Most have venereal disease. Don't take a chance. And it's just like, oh my goodness. Another one was gonorrhea, ... No is the best tactic. The next is prophylactic. These were real posters.
Oh, it rhymes.
I know. So, aren't they witty? All right. And then in the US around this time, Margaret Sanger, you might know that name, is popularized and coined the term birth control, emphasizing that women should have control over their own reproductive lives. She was the sixth child of a poor working class Irish Catholic immigrant family that came from Corning, New York. So she kind of knew what it was like seeing her mom grow up with all these kids. So I'm sure that is kind of what moved her. And in 1916, she opened the first contraceptive clinic, and for 10 cents, any woman could receive accurate information about reproduction and contraception. And then this was closed down very shortly after she opened it. I saw two different amount of time or days that she was open. One said it was closed down within 11 days and Sanger was arrested, and another source said it closed after 30 days after she refused to make a statement that she would never repeat her offenses. But her trial attracted public interest and funding for her continued fight to get women reproductive rights and control thereof. She was arrested multiple times for breaking obscenity laws like the Comstock Act that I was telling you about obscene and immoral material. But she didn't stop. I mean, that's why she was arrested so many times. She was going to make sure that whatever it took to help women, she was going to do it. I thought that was a pretty cool chick. And then in 1921, Sanger founded the American Birth Control League, which later became Planned Parenthood. So we can kind of thank her for that. We can't thank her for that. I mean, she pushed forward. And then another prominent woman was Maria Stopes. She opened the first permanent contraceptive clinic that offered education and cervical caps as their primary form of birth control. Sanger and Stopes did a great deal to remove the stigma associated with birth control. Latex rubber was invented in 1920. This latex rubber for condoms was stronger, thinner, and had a shelf life of 5 years instead of 3 months. Also, vulcanized rubber required the use of gasoline to manufacture, and latex rubber did not. So it was better for the environment. And not using gasoline for the factories was much less likely for the factory to burn up into flames. So where they were making this vulcanized rubber and using gasoline, it made it probably an unsafe place to be manufacturing stuff and working. And then German Jewish Dr. Ernst Grafenberg, who the G-spot is termed after, I didn't know that, pioneered the intrauterine device, or IUD, in the 1920s and 30s. Grafenberg's work was suppressed by the Nazi regime, which considered contraception a threat to the Aryan race. So, of course, he moved to America, where he and his colleagues continued to develop IUDs, which is now used by about 7% of women in the U.S. This was a very interesting, where we kind of talk about, Egypt and then what they used. But in the U.S., during this time, I think it was like up until between the 1920s and 1960s, women often resorted to Lysol and Coca-Cola as a post-coital douche, which they incorrectly believed would kill sperm. Lysol even advertised that the use of Lysol would protect their married happiness. Yeah, high use during the Great Depression of these methods, Lysol and Coca-Cola. Side effects were burning, irritation, and in death in some users.
Yeah. That's what I was exactly picturing.
Yeah, could you imagine using Lysol? Oh my gosh.
No.
In the 1950s, scientists Gregory Pincus and John Rock, with support from Planned Parenthood, developed the first hormonal birth control pill. The pill became widely available in the 1960s and is now the most popular method of birth control. This sparked the women's liberation movement, which resulted in a record number of women attending college, entering the workforce, and choosing their own paths in life. A source I found, of course, men get all the glory, found that states that Sanger actually is the one who gave Pincus the idea of a birth control pill. And so, I'm sure they get all the credit and she gets none. And then, however, a doctor in Mexico City during this time, Carl de Gerasi, had already discovered a pill that could prevent ovulation. So they talk about that. Oh, they're the founders, but it looks like another guy in Mexico City actually was before them. And then in 1956, the FDA approved the use of hormone pills for the treatment of menstrual disorders. Not birth control, but menstrual disorders. And in 1960, the FDA approved Enovid as a contraceptive pill. And then in 1965, the birth control pill became legal nationwide for use to married couples. And this case was Griswold v. Connecticut. I remember reading about that in school also, but that was the bigger decision on just getting it out there for married couples to choose when and how they have kids. This decision was based on the right to marital privacy. It wasn't on the right to control your body or anything like that. It's just marital privacy, not disease prevention or family planning. 6.5 million women were taking birth control to prevent pregnancy at the time. I mean, that's what we want, right? We want to be able to control that. In 1972, birth control became legal to everyone across the U.S., regardless of marital status. And this case was Eisenstadt v. Baird. And then this is kind of like jumping ahead of time, but a study from 2006 to 2010 found that 62% of women of reproductive age were using some form of birth control. I thought the number would be higher, but I guess only 62% of us are preventing pregnancy.
Well, what was the
it's
age
just a study.
range that there's
I
a
didn't
lot of
get
things
that.
to consider as why it was so low, right?
Yeah.
If there's, young teenagers in that age group, then they may not even be having sex. And are they included in that? Who knows?
It just says reproductive age, so I'd imagine.
Right. So that could be as young as 11 or 12. But are 11 and 12-year-olds having sex? I don't know. Maybe.
No, I hope not. Anyhow, thanks to those before us, we women are now able to choose when and if we want to have children. Some of the methods still used today is the pull and pray, condoms, spermicides, the IUDs. IUDs have had kind of some problems. There's been perforation into the uterus, so I know there's issues with that. So, it kind of goes back to the old adage that any type of birth control you're using, even when it was toxic to you, it can hurt you. Like you had touched on, Rebecca, birth control pills, it's controversial. They say that there's evidence that it can cause cancer issues taking birth control because you're up in your hormones, and that's not a natural process for us. But, we still take that risk because we want to be able to choose when and how we have kids. Some of the current world issues is approximately 308,000 women die each year for pregnancy-related causes. And if you want to help, in these third world countries, you can donate to help women in countries that have limited or no access to birth control. And one of the websites I found was Pathfinder International, and the website is just pathfinder.org. You can also donate to Planned Parenthood at plannedparenthood.org, which will help, underprivileged women or just families in general to get that access to information and health. And it's not just about birth control. It's about, all kinds of things, just making sure you're a healthy woman, getting your checkups. Planned Parenthood provides that. So yeah, that's all I have. If you have any questions, comments.
Yeah. Also, if you think of people in other countries too getting raped, and now they're have a bad status and they can't get married. Like, you have to protect these women in some way. And sometimes contraception is the only way to do that, right? I forget, there was a big story about a woman in the Middle East, and a man raped her and impregnated her, and she was in prison. And the only way for her to get out of prison was to marry this man. You know, he has nowhere to go. There's no winning for her. Right? It's all men's fault. Either way you look at
I
it.
agree.
Like, they're trapping,
Yeah.
you know, like, truly. And I would say, or at least in my experience with the men that I'm surrounded by, that we have advanced in 2025 from 1960 and taking care of with, what is it called? When the man has to pay for his child and they're not married. Child support. It's really early. That those laws are in place now also among contraception to protect women. It's, there's a lot to think about.
Yeah. Made me think of something, but I'll get to that in a minute. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just going to say, at least our society has spread the responsibility somewhat to men, and it's just not all on women, although we still bear the primary responsibilities and we still have to carry the child. And, if the father's not in the picture, even if it's, if you're only getting money, that's not enough. That's not enough to raise that kid.
Absolutely.
You need two parents. It's just so hard. I've done it both ways, so I know it's a breeze when you have a partner comparatively.
If you have a good partner, that is.
Very true.
Yeah, it doesn't apply to all. But yeah, there's another method I saw, and I don't know if one of you told me about it or if I read it and was kind of shocking, but there was this, I don't know if it's the Middle East or Africa, where rape is such still a very big issue. And Africa's a really big continent, but in some of the countries in Africa, where they use this device, which the only way I can explain it is it's rigid, and it's a reverse condom. The woman puts it in there. There's teeth on the reverse condom, so if a man tries to rape her, it's not going to go well for him.
I have heard about that. I've read about it. I don't think I've discussed it with you, but I cheered a little. Yay!
Yeah. I was like, yeah, go ahead. Try that out, buddy. I mean,
teach him a lesson. That would get you a penis in your pocket.
Yeah, it would. So that's pretty effective method, I'd say. I'd say go women on that one. But yeah, that was just one of the things I read. It sounds barbaric, but I'm like, well, I mean, it's her body, right?
Don't
sounds do that.
Fair.
She's not inviting you.
It sounds fair.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you, Heather. That was really good.
Yeah, really good. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for being here with us. Until next time.
Till next time.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.